Howdy folks, Doc here with Last Best Tool. And a lot of times a company produces a tool, in this case the Benchmade Adamus, and then they produce a smaller version after maybe a year or two or 3 or 5, and that actually is basically a scaled down version of the original. It's pretty common. It's like they get all the issues taken care of with the big one. They make a smaller one. Here's the Benchmade bug out, kind of an interesting knife, super lightweight, thin. You know, how could you make it better? I don't know, make a smaller, lighter, thinner version. And they did. And then Benchmade has this knife called a Griptilian. This is probably their best-selling knife in history. And they came out with, shortly after, a mini grip or mini Griptilian. Both of these are just tremendously hot sellers because there's something about that design, and the price point is kind of the gateway drug to Benchmade. Surefire, on the other hand, they often produce a light and then make a smaller version. So I've got the Fury and the Fury, the standard Fury, and then the Fury P3 X, which is a larger version, more powerful, extra battery. Now, those two came out pretty quick in time. And then another example would be the Surefire E2D Defender. Now, this particular one is in its 3rd or 4th generation right now, but at its 3rd generation, Surefire came out with a version that was a little bit smaller. It actually competed with a lot of their other single 123 cell hand cell or hand lights. 123 is the type of battery it uses. But anyway, you can see that the heads are very similar in size. In fact, you can't tell them apart unless you can see the length, and it's about one battery. But they came out with a smaller version. Now, there are a lot of other tools. Let's see, Leatherman didn't miss this boat. You know, they've got their large plier multi-tools, but they also came out with smaller versions. You know, taking their same design and just scaling it way down. And why I say they scaled it down is because they started out with this kind of a traditional size, maybe hand size, human hand size, and then went down. Now let's look at some tools. No particular order here. What I've got are some tiny tools, and I call these tiny tools. And they're just like real tools, only they're smaller. Here is a tiny pair of vice grips. Little itty bitty thing. This is an Irwin, actual vice grip branded. I don't know where these are made, probably not the US. It'd be nice if Snap On made one of their, or rebranded one of their heavy duty versions. Can't have any video like this without a mini pry bar from Snap On. Scaling things way down for those mini prying jobs. Here's a Vera mini Joker wrench. This particular one is 7mm to 10mm. So max size. This is the extra small. You might be noticing a long fingernail here. I actually slammed this in a door and then ground it on a sanding wheel. So I'm actually letting the nail grow out so I have something to compare it to see how much nail damage I did actually. So that's what's going on there. But anyway, let's keep going. Knipex has a beautiful little tiny, I consider this a mini lineman. It's actually often known as a combination plier. It's got cutters, it's got bolt grabbers, it's got kind of the front flat end. I love this thing, but look at that head. It's smaller than my thumb, but wonderful little teeny weeny mini tool. Here's a pair of mini channel grips. These are essentially ignition pliers, but basically you can see that they use the same tongue and groove design, but in a really small application, not very strong. I mean, the metal's so thin that if you don't have it lined up just right, you'll just pop it out of the tongue and groove. And of course, made in the USA. This is probably one of the bigger tools in here, but it's a bolt cutter. Usually you think of bolt cutters, 2, 3, 4 foot long things designed to chop through some pretty big metal. Look, my finger barely fits in there. It's a tiny little cobalt cutter, high leverage design. This is the 7101160. So 160 centimeter handle. I mean, it almost disappears in the hand. Snap On, they make a small talon grip needle nose, little tiny thing. They try to keep the handles somewhat usable in the human hand. You start to see that, you know, across the board, like with the Knipex. But they've really shrunk the head down, but tried to maintain, you know, all of the essence and the features of the standard talon grip. Got to have one of these. This is the Crescent wrench, also known as the adjustable wrench, or maybe it's the other way around. And this particular thing at 4 inches, it just disappears into your hand, yet it is a full-on USA-made Crescent wrench. Let's take a look at some of the other Knipex offerings. This is the 8603-125 plier wrench. So it is a little tiny plier wrench. Not the smallest, we'll get there, but still, this is a darling of the EDC world, as is this one. This is the 8701-125 Cobra. It's the little Cobra. It's the smallest Cobra that actually has a push button, and then, of course, this is the smallest plier wrench that has the push button. So you know where we're going with that. Here is the smallest plier wrench. This is the 86-100, doesn't need a handle designation, which is often that second set of numbers. Tells you if it's a dipped handle or an ESD or comfort grip or whatever. So little tiny one, but it uses a novel design in the adjustment. So you open it fully, then you have the freedom to slide it, and then as soon as you start dropping this handle, it does engage and then give you the camming. Another one, let's see, would be the little mini Cobra, and this particular one is the 87-100. You can see they are very similar in size. They're both 100s. Little tiny jobs. I mean, these just, when these came out, the everyday carry aficionados really began to appreciate what kind of plier power you could put into your pocket, you know, at just a few grams, and, you know, whatever the size is, 100 millimeters, 10 centimeters, 1 decimeter. I mean, literally just amazing for a tiny tool. This is an old Snap On 44 ACP. This is one of their micro slip joint pliers, little tiny thing. This guy here does have some actual serious application. It's real steel. It's a solid design, great gripping. It's just in a small form factor. It looks like, you know, you tossed a pair of their regular pliers in the dryer. But I would love to see this first in a slip joint, but then also in another design that we'll get to in a moment. Snap On comes in again with their little micro ratchets, hand ratchets. This is a 3/8 ratchet in a tiny little space. I mean, look at that thing. It's almost nothing but a head right here. You can use it for things you might have trouble with a regular ratchet. The design of this handle is just beautiful in the hand, the way this thing works. So little tiny micro driver. Again, a tiny tool that's just like a real tool, except it's smaller. Another pry bar. Snap On makes a little tiny lady's foot, a rolling pry bar. Very small, very simple design, super handy, but, you know, in a micro size. Olfa, wow, coming in here with a 9mm Snap-on, or Snap-off, excuse me, wrench, I'm got Snap-on on the brain, Snap-off knife. Now this particular one does have a metal triangular blade carrier here, a couple of plastic components. You can slide this off to place the blades, etc. But a little tiny precision Snap-on knife from Olfa for little tiny precision cutting jobs. DeWalt makes a mini parts tray. It's a little tiny thing. I actually wanted a second one and found out that I couldn't order one. Maybe you can now, but I couldn't back then. And I had to order an entire new set of bits just to get this thing. It was worth it because I really like that parts tray. Snap-on makes a tiny little hard-handled reversible screwdriver. So this whole thing is pretty small. In fact, you can see how it compares there. Still, you get some decent leverage, not a lot, but very handy in this tiny tool. Using that same handle, Snap On also makes mini pry bars, mini picks. We saw the mini pry bar a moment ago. And then mini picks basically take their larger picks and just scale them way down. And I find these equally as handy, possibly more handy than the larger versions. Milwaukee mini tape measure, little tiny thing, only 6.5 feet. But to make this teeny weeny little tape measure look absolutely massive, well, you could compare it to like this Stanley Power Lock here. And you can see this little power lock, which is only 3 feet instead of 6.5, especially with this super narrow blade. Little tiny tape measure. Little tiny tool, totally is functional, just a little bit shorter. Snap On makes stubby wrenches. I consider these super stubby wrenches. I mean, this is a 19mm wrench. If you look at that, it's not very big. So you got a huge space here for grabbing a bolt and a small lever arm, but very convenient. Gear Wrench took that a step further by making ratcheting versions of these stubby wrenches. I consider these super stubbies. You can get regular stubbies which are 1 inch or 2 long, but I guess they call those stubbies. Snap-on did do a 15-degree offset. I do find this quite handy, but for a ratcheting one in this platform, this is pretty crazy. And then finally, the last thing, I'm going to compare my little tiny Blue Point 2-ounce head. Compare that. Grab this. Look at the size difference. Look at that. For a big old framing hammer to some 2-ounce itty bitty little thing here. Now, there are some tiny tools I would love to see. So one of them is, it would be great if Knipex shrunk this guy down. Imagine this, or even, to this level. A tiny little one. If you look at the Snap-on slip joint, that's pretty much where we're headed. Is a little slip joint plier, but with maybe either the push button at this scale or maybe their novel sliding version to get a tiny little twin grip. That would be epic. What else would be epic? Imagine if Snap-on made, this is the HL138CP, it's their high leverage slip joint plier. And this is just incredible. I mean, basically they just have a leverage point. I don't know what looks like 5-to-1 or something, or maybe more. What would that be? 8-to-1, just a guess. But anyway, if they shrunk that thing down to this size, you would have incredible gripping power, even cutting power if they put some knives on it, in something that could disappear into your hand. That would be cool. And then finally, what if, I know everyone's been asking for it, this is their new LN47ACF, huge needle nose, triple slip joint cutting, grabbing plier. I mean, if you knock this off, it looks like almost a regular plier. Add the needle nose, shrink that down. That would be amazing. I would pay exactly the same price for both. I mean, to have the power, only scaled down of this kind of a design in this size, that to me might just be the ultimate EDC. Snap-on, if you're listening, there it is. Call it the last best tool design for that last best tool when you are building the ultimate in EDC case. Anyway, or EDC kit. So these are tiny tools that are just like big tools. They just are smaller. And I really like these guys. I appreciate the engineering that goes into making something smaller, and that they continue to evolve the line into little tiny tools. And with that, Doc out.